Okay, hi everyone. My name's Neil Statham. I'm head of PE at Heartland International School, and I'm one of the vice chairman of DASA. And joining me today, I've got Taif Al-Dalemi. Hi, Taif.
Hi, Neil.
Do you want to just introduce yourself to everyone who's watching today?
Yeah, my name's Taif Al-Dalemi, and I'm a sports therapist at Valiant Clinic. I've worked a lot with the younger age groups and a variety of schools out here for the last 8 years or so, and happy to join you on this webinar today to discuss detraining and a safe return to sport and activity after the 6-month break that will be the quarantine and summer holidays for the kids that you're working with.
Fantastic. Taif, you've got a bit of a background in sport as well, which helps give this some context.
Yeah, very average rugby player, but somehow managed to get a couple of international caps under my belt, more due to living in this region than any physical prowess.
Fantastic. Okay, so one of the things that you and I have been discussing in relation to this webinar is a safe return to sport. So from an injury perspective, what do you think are the key considerations for teachers in getting children back into sport and, more importantly, PE safely and reducing the chance of injury?
Yeah, I think there's two main factors here, both in terms of the increased injury risk and a decrease in performance. I think it's important to consider the latter as well and manage expectations as kids come back from this 6-month approximately phase of their lives where they've had less access to facilities, be it pool, gym, the sports teams haven't been running as they have been, or their PE classes. So the key thing to think about here is how the effect detraining over that 6-month period will have on them. So in terms of injury risk, we need to look at starting off at a level that is safe and conducive for them to progress on with. So that's the key thing there, is to really acknowledge that there'll be a certain level of detraining and manage that in terms of injury risk.
Okay, so in terms of a typical PE lesson, teachers might have anywhere between 40 and 60 minutes. How would you advise that they allocate that time to help mitigate some of those risks of detraining that you've mentioned?
Yeah, well, I've put together something here. If I can just share my screen with you. So can you see that there, Neela?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of a session structure, just put that as a slideshow. There's a couple of important things to consider. First of all, in terms of sport or activity choice. So if we look over here at September, ideally within the UAE, we want, if we have access to get them into the pool, both in terms of the heat, but also in terms of the fact that it's a non-weight bearing activity. So it's very safe on the joints for the kids when returning back to a higher level of sport and activity. The next is, if we see them twice a week, is to do something like gymnastics, whereby the kids are developing their resistance to body weight exercises and getting used to proprioception, especially over a 6-month period. We can imagine at this age group will have experienced some growth spurts during that time, and the decrease in coordination associated with that, which is obviously an increase in injury risk. So having both detraining and decrease in coordination due to growth spurts is something that we need to take into account. You mentioned session structure, Neil, and for that, the key to emphasize when they first come back is to put more time into their movement preparation and their recovery. So at the start here, they've come back in September. In their gymnastics session, I'd start with at least 20 minutes of movement preparation. So that's all stuff like your basic core control work, Superman, bridging, some single leg stability work, with the younger age groups, you want to make it as interactive and fun as possible. It can be bouncing a ball to each other while standing on one leg, but just so that you get some of that single leg balance training in there, making sure their fundamental movement patterns are on point. So can they squat, can they lunge, can they push, can they pull, those sort of actions. So that's what I'd be focusing on at the start in terms of movement preparation. The middle part of the session with the skill and conditioning would be reduced in terms of time compared to what they'll experience as the weeks go by, especially with the conditioning. With increased fatigue in the session, we know that that decreases neuromuscular coordination. So if someone is tired, they have a higher chance of injury risk. You know, you throw in 6 months of detraining and a lot of fatigue in a session, you're asking for an injury. I managed to touch base with a friend of mine who's a PE teacher in China and ask him about his exposure to injuries with the kids coming back post summer holidays, post the quarantine. And in China, they actually have PE every single day, and he's had minimal injuries. The only thing that caused injury, and this was throughout the school, was fitness testing. So I know you want to get some baseline measurements in there, but running a bleep test and with kids that are going to be fatigued and deconditioned is not a great idea. And that's where they got most of their injuries. So they actually sacked that off completely within their schools. So no fitness testing in the early stages due to that increased fatigue. They also had issues with the mask wearing as well for that higher sort of cardiovascular tasks. And then finally in that session, recovery 15 minutes. So this is, you know, your stretching, your yoga routines, and it's also a chance to touch base with the kids about other fitness factors such as nutrition and sleep, and emphasize the importance of that in your recovery time. Yeah, so I mean, this is an ideal scenario, and I'm talking about UAE-based schools here. So in September, we've done swim and gymnastics for a month, and then progressing on to October, we look to do non-contact sports, obviously in line with whatever guidelines have been sent through, the DH. What's your governing body here, Neil?
It'll be, at the moment, the guidance is coming through KHDA and DSC, the Biosports Council.
Yeah, so as per those companies, those organizations, what they're recommending or advising that we have to stick to here. But in an ideal scenario, in October, we look to introduce non-contact sports such as badminton, tennis, cricket, and then if we're seeing them twice a week, then on day 2, some form of circuit training. And you can see here in terms of that session structure, we've got less time on movement prep and recovery and more on that skill and conditioning side of things. So hopefully we've built up a bit of a base now in terms of their fitness and their movement, and you can push them a bit more with that fatigue and skill training. Important that you have multi-directional movements in there, and particularly, you know, you're working with a variety of kids with different fitness levels. You want to be grading the exercises so that there's a progression and a regression. So the fitter kids, if we take something as basic as a push-up, that they're doing full push-ups or even more challenging variations of that. Whereas the less fit kids, you know, they can be doing it on their knees, or they can be doing a raised version of it. So that's just a very basic example within your circuit training of, you know, progression and regression of exercises. But to make it as inclusive as possible, you need to have those set up accordingly. And then finally in November, hopefully we're back into our contact sports, you know, basketball, football, rugby, netball, and then on day 2, if we're seeing them twice a week, athletics. So that's why I've kept athletics towards, November as opposed to at the start, is because you're looking for all-out efforts, people to really be pushing themselves, you know, be it in a sort of a more anaerobic sense, like shot put, or be it in more endurance sense of cross country or 200, 400 meters type training. And you can see there our movement prep is reduced down to 5 minutes, as is our recovery, and there's a much bigger session time towards skill and conditioning, because by then we're hoping the kids are fitter, stronger, and more resilient to injury.
Fantastic. And as things start to open up in the summer, now. So we're seeing community swimming pools open, we've seen gyms open. Is there anything that you could recommend, or that you think teachers should recommend to students that's going to help them return to PE and sport in the safest possible way?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is to have the kids doing something every single day. Now, the World Health Organization advises that kids of school-going age should be doing at least an hour of activity every day. I know, given, again, this is for the UAE-based kids, there's going to be a lot more people staying within the UAE for the summer versus traveling due to the current restrictions. So we've got the added component of dealing with the heat here. So a lot of the indoor stuff that is available to them, even without facilities opening up, such as making use of all the online type stuff. Obviously, Joe Wicks in the bottom right of the screen, or PE teachers have done a lot of their own type of sort of video circuits and workouts that the kids can get involved in. At the top left of the screen, we have a lot of kids now are playing computer games, but the more interactive we can make those, like your Wii Fits, if that's going to be the difference between them moving and not, then I'd embrace that technology as well. But really getting in with the parents and advising them that this isn't just in terms of the health and fitness, or fitness and sporting achievements, but also in terms of building up their immune system. There's so many studies now coming out with and showing that exercise is crucial in terms of building up a kid's immunity. And especially given the scenario we found ourselves in now with COVID-19, that's really important to emphasize that point to parents. So getting their kid out, walking the dog, buying a jump rope, that's something that they can do at home, even in the hot weather. You don't need much space for, and you really do get, the key is a lot of studies, again, showing that intensity is very important. If you're reduced activity, as long as you keep up your intensity, you can maintain a lot of the gains you've made pre-quarantine.
If we fast forward to a return to sports scenario here, and we find ourselves 6 months to a year down the line, and children are vigorously participating in sport and PE lessons. While we're on the topic of injury, what kind of injuries, be it overuse or otherwise, do you see most commonly? And is there any kind of guidance that you might give to teachers or people who are designing their sports programs, particularly now a time or a chance for reflection, to avoid that, or to things that they might want to consider if they're rebuilding or restructuring?
Yeah, great question. And the key, this slide here shows the acute versus chronic workload ratio. And you were talking about important principles that PE teachers need to take into account when returning their kids back to PE and the after school sporting activities that take place as well. Basically, to understand this graph, you want to think of what they've done in the last 4 weeks, so the last month, as a ratio to what they've done in the last week. And if that ratio is too high, you put them at an increased risk of injury. So a lot of it is common sense. If they've gone from sitting on their backside for the last month, playing computer games and ordering takeaways and minimal activity, and they come back into school, they're doing PE twice a week, they're doing after school sports events that are made available at the time, you are asking for a bit of trouble there. And in terms of injuries, we see in terms of that load management, we see a lot of chronic injuries like Osgood-Schlatter's, which affects the knee, and Severs, which affects the ankle. And with that growing population, when a joint is loaded, and I'll just show you here, and is stressed and doesn't get the appropriate recovery time, then often that can result in injury, particularly when the bones are growing quicker than the muscles can to keep up with them. So those are frequent injuries we see. Osgood-Schlatter's, Severs are two common ones there, but they're more chronic. In terms of acute, we see a lot of ankle sprains, especially with that decrease in coordination, and then you're getting kids, maybe that they've put on a bit of weight and are less fit over the summer period, and they come back and they're doing twisting, turning, multi-directional sports. We see a lot of ankle injuries, and then for those that are returning to contact sports, concussion as well. So just with that decrease in coordination that is common with this age group, those are two acute injuries we'll see a good bit of. I would advise in terms of concussion that they go and see Dr. Kate Jordan at DXBPE here. She's the main go-to person in that area. But there's lots of things that they can do to avoid injuries in general. And that is taking into account stuff like the previous slide, where you don't want to build up too much in a short period of time. You want to try and keep the load on the child not more than 10% per week versus what they've previously done, okay? And then in terms of recovery, so this is sort of sports science 101, but if you load a tissue, you want to give it, or a person or a body, you want to give it enough time so that it recovers, gets stronger, gets fitter, and then that's when you can load again. If you keep loading in this area, so they've trained, they've done a session, and then again the next day, and again without any recovery, then that's when you can lead to more of those overtraining type injuries.
Cool. Yeah, I think that it's definitely something that's going to have to be an important consideration for schools and teachers. I think we're going to be faced with a lot of children who are desperate to get back to activity, and we're going to want them to get back to activity too, but there's going to have to be some mediation in there to make sure it's done as safely as possible. With that in mind, there's also another, the other part of the population who are maybe not participating in any competitive sport or taking advantage of school sports programs, and maybe only partially engaging with school sport or PE lessons in general. Are there any specific risks associated with an overweight population, or those students that really have been sedentary or have taken this opportunity to do, in some cases, no exercise over the last 12 to 14 weeks, and will probably continue in that vein over the summer holidays?
Yeah, I think the physical risks mirror those of active kids. You're looking at those similar type of injuries, but I would look at more sort of the mental side. If they come back into an environment in PE where they're going to be unable to complete the exercises, they're not given appropriate regression options for them, then you're going to lose them early on, and we don't want that. So if they walk in the door day one and they're doing fitness testing and they're coming last in everything, and then they go and do a circuit class and they can't complete any of the exercises because it's all too demanding for them, that's more what I'd worry about, is losing them on the mental side of things versus the physical injury. The physical injury will mirror pretty much what active kids will have, but their fatigue levels will come about a lot quicker. So having those progressions and regressions in the sessions are crucial. Trying to pair them up with kids of the similar fitness levels for those activities, so that they can compete and enjoy it, and just try and make it as fun as possible. That's the other key factor. We all know with any age group, even adults, that the more enjoyment you can put into the sessions, the more they're laughing and having fun. The longer they'll stick with that and get back into a healthy activity routine.
You mentioned earlier on about the importance and the guidance from the World Health Organization about kids being active and vigorously exercising every day, which I think is something everyone in this webinar feels passionately about. There's also concern from some people about the overtraining aspect, or the too much too soon, and the just because they can doesn't mean that they should sort of question. So for people who are looking at redesigning their PE curriculum or their sports program, or who are starting to really question how much is too much for some of these students at different times in their development, is there any advice that you can give them, either based on your knowledge or looking back at injuries, cases, common concerns that you see?
Yeah, I mean, obvious things, you know, once you're in those sessions and you're looking at the kids, is that, you know, are they looking fatigued? Are they more likely to have infections? Are they more, you know, reduced enthusiasm for the sessions, reduced sleep patterns? All these sort of things are signs that they're overtraining or doing too much. A way to combat that, especially for the older age group, is to actually do some self-monitoring. So things like resting heart rate, keeping a track of weight, keeping a track of sleep are all really important components, and you might get some buy-in from your more athletic population group with the older years with this sort of stuff. And you can take it a step further, and this is used widely within athletic populations across the world within the younger age group. This was actually something developed with the Football Association in Ireland for the younger population. So looking at quality of sleep, energy levels, muscle soreness, and how they're performing within their sessions. So, you know, you can really push the boat out with monitoring, self-monitoring, and this will be a good gauge of whether your kids or your athletic population group are doing too much, and, you know, mood, food intake, fluid intake, and how the session feels. So yeah, these are some key variables to measure, and I can share this with you afterwards that you can use with the kids in your school. But yeah, the benefit of this is that you can pick up if you have limited contact time within your sessions. So you may not realize that, you know, one of your athletic population is sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, and they've got increased resting heart rate, and you know, they're dehydrated, etc. So this is just a nice way to pick up on that.
Taif, this has been really useful. Thank you very much for your time today. I'm going to give you an opportunity to give us some key take-homes here. 3 things that I've noted down for myself is that I'm definitely going to consider readiness for movement more when I'm planning and designing my curriculum on return to what we hope will be physical school in September, something that's definitely going to be practical within a social distancing setting as well, and is going to be of benefit to children. The second thing I've written down here is the urgency to return to sport, and the desire for students to be competitive again will be high, but it's something that's going to have to be managed carefully and practically by teachers. And although we all want children to be playing, competing, enjoying, and their well-being is important, we have to make sure that we're the responsible party in there, and that we help them to make good decisions that are going to allow them to enjoy the full term, not just part of it or a few weeks. And I really like the stuff about self-monitoring and the volume of work that students are doing. And I think for some of my more enthusiastic parents and families, especially younger down, the self-monitoring is something that I'm going to be suggesting to them. If you could summarize, I know it might be difficult, a few key take-homes for teachers, what would they be?
There's a couple here, but the main thing is just be aware that a lot of these kids have had 6 months of detraining. So when they come in initially, we don't want high levels of fatigue in the session and lots of multi-directional movement. So we want to start with activities like swimming, like gymnastics, like dance, that they really get more in tune with their body, and that the emphasis is on movement prep and recovery versus the skill and conditioning part of the session. So that's number one. Number two is in terms of that more chronic load management. So be aware that you're seeing them for the PE sessions, but what's going on outside of that, and try and educate them that, you know, you don't want to lose a lot of your pupils through injury early doors just because they jump back into doing all the sports that are available to them that they've missed out on over the last 6 months. But at the same time, it's a balancing act. We know that there's going to be some kids that you're going to need to gently push and encourage, and other kids that you're going to have to gently pull back in and try and manage how much they're doing. And that's the art form of our profession, is figuring out who needs what. So as long as the fundamental basis on science is that we're managing their load, we're giving them fun sessions that they're enjoying, and they're looking forward to getting back into activity in different sports, but we're doing it in such a way that they're not going to end up injured or disenfranchised with getting back into activity if they're maybe the more overweight, less enthusiastic kids. We create an environment whereby they can enjoy it, and they'll progress throughout the year in the sports.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for your time today. On screen there, you can see Taif's contact details as well for those people who are based in Dubai. I can personally recommend him as an excellent person to help you get back on the road to recovery, and someone who is great at working with students, young athletes as well, from having been there and done it and won the t-shirt himself. So thank you very much for your time today, Taif, and we'll see you later.
My pleasure. All the best.